They told me the museum would be mine after dark. By day, the Ho Chi Minh City Museum of Art is a hive. School groups shuffling past statues, couples posing beneath carved balustrades, the endless motorbike hiss from Pho Duc Chinh Street slipping over the old courtyard walls. But that night, the guard named Than led me past the ticket desk and into the hollowed quiet of the trio of 1930s buildings, each with its cool belly of tiles and staircases. He held a ring of keys that seemed older than both of us. He kept glancing toward the upper floors as if the darkness up there were listening. 2 hours, he said. Third-floor gallery is closed at night. Closed because of the air conditioning or because of the story? I asked, trying to grin. Than took a breath as if to answer, then didn't. He set down a brass key on the reception desk and slid it toward me. If the lights flicker, do not use the elevator. Take the south staircase. You'll hear the street on that side. He left me with the keys, the echo of his shoes fading across the mosaic floor, and the smell of old oil paint and damp plaster. Outside, the city hummed its insomnia. Inside, the museum swallowed sound whole. I was there to photograph architectural details for an article. A puff piece, really, for a travel magazine that liked its history lightly glazed. A note about Art Deco cornices, a paragraph about the once opulent residence of Hui Bi Hua, the real estate magnate who had owned half the city. Maybe, if the editor was feeling generous, a sidebar on the legend. People loved legends. They didn't always love the truth. I set my tripod in the main hall, adjusted the camera, and tried to ignore that cool draft that can exist without wind, a draft that seems like a held breath. Above the grand staircase, the chandeliers rested like sleeping jellyfish in the dark. My footsteps were too loud. Every shutter click was a dropped plate. On the first landing, a portrait watched me, a girl with a delicate mouth and ungovernable eyes, brushstrokes so meticulous the light in them could almost happen again. No plaque gave her name. The label beneath used the phrase I'd already found in a dozen glossy brochures, mysterious illness. The building, flamboyant even in its bones, unfolded its details to my lens. I liked the work of noticing. Hairline cracks in the terracotta, the patient filigree of wrought iron, the pattern of gecko footprints in the dust behind a pedestal. The third floor was supposed to be off-limits, but the reason I'd taken this assignment was that it wasn't off-limits to me. The magazine had arranged a late-night exception to let me photograph the family suites, Hui Bi Hua's private rooms, the former mansion now converted to galleries. The daughter's old room was up there, the one people whispered about. I climbed. The stairwell tightened. The air turned the temperature of old bathwater. On the second landing, a fan spun lazily, though the switch on the wall was off. It made a shadow that trembled across the mosaic like a black moth. Electric gremlins, I said aloud, meaning nothing by it, meaning everything. At the third floor, a velvet rope barred the corridor, a fondant-thick attempt at formality. On either side, locked doors faced each other like quarreling relatives. Toward the end hung a door with a narrow metal panel bolted across the bottom of it, a rectangle with a slot, small enough for a tray. The plaque beside it read, "Private," but the door itself wore history like heat. The paint blistered in a shape that looked like fingers pressed and dragged. A line of scratches marred the wood just above the slot. My skin pebbled. There are pieces of architecture that act like a scent. You cannot see what they hold, but your body remembers, even if your mind does not. I stepped under the rope, felt briefly ridiculous for the cautious lift of one leg, the childish trespass of it. I told myself that Than would blame the magazine if there were questions later. I told myself that I had written about worse to get a clean photo. Closer, the slot looked freshly oiled. That made no sense, but it gleamed. I bent to photograph it, to capture the way the light slicked across the brass, and my camera caught something else first, a reflected movement. Not behind me, in the gap beneath the door. Something was moving in that line of darkness. Not moving, panting. A sound like air pulled through cloth. I lowered the camera. The sound ceased. "Hello?" My throat made the clumsy shape of it. My voice came back at me thinner. I waited, ear almost to the door, and the museum settled around me again. The arthritic creak of wood, the city's distant purr, the tap of water somewhere deep in the walls. Then, faint and far as a memory, I heard a porcelain clink, ceramic on tile, A bowl set down, careful, as if not to be heard, as if it were habit to be quiet. My fingers found the doorknob. It turned, then caught. Locked. You're alone, I told myself, as I have told myself in archives and empty theaters and night trains. My hand was shaking, so I put it to use and checked the other doors. All locked. I went back to work. There's a way to step back from fear by naming objects. Camera, strap, lens cap, banister, finial, riser. I took my photos wide, then close, then closer, until the details were so intimate they could be anything. Flesh or wood or velvet, all the same grain. Time passed in the slow economy of night work. The city's rhythms shifted. The bars emptied. The scooters became occasional commas. Something padded down the corridor behind me, bare and soft and quicker than shoes. It stopped when I stopped. When I turned, there was only the rope, the open yaw of the stairwell, and a low, dragging draft that moved the edges of a long curtain that shouldn't have been moving at all. I wanted to go down. I wanted a drink of water. I wanted, ridiculously, to see the guard's bored face, to hear a normal complaint about mosquitoes and low pay. And yet the corridor tugged at me the way a current does when you stand in the surf and tell yourself you'll turn back after the next wave. At the far end, the family suite's sitting room lay behind glass. The museum had preserved it like a stage set, silk wall coverings in a saturated teal, a fainting couch, a phonograph whose horn curled like a trumpet vine. On a side table sat a lacquered box. Inside the glass case, a small card offered the right facts. Residence of Hui Bi Hua, completed 1934. Mansion converted to Museum of Art. Then, in smaller print, the sentence that had annoyed me when I first read it online. His daughter, who passed away of a mysterious illness, is said to haunt these halls. Mysterious illness. The phrase had done more violence than a bullet. In the reflection on the case glass, in the slender palimpsest of my face in the hallway behind me, someone else stood. Closer than I would have allowed a stranger to be. A girl with hair parted straight as a blade down the middle, eyes the color of old rice paper. She moved when I did not. She lifted a hand to her cheek, a gesture so tentative I felt the urge to mirror it, to prove to her that she could be met in gentleness. But her hand passed through her face like fog closing around fog. By the time I turned, the corridor was empty, but a smell lingered that did not belong to museum air. Smoke and moxa, and something medicinal I could almost name from childhood fevers. I put my palm to the glass case. It was cold. The girl's reflection was gone. But the lacquered box on the table inside the case was not where it had been a moment earlier. It had turned on its own axis, a fraction. Its lid no longer faced the room, but the door with the slot. I do not know if I gasped. I know only that my tongue found the taste of copper, and that I understood, suddenly and horribly, that I was not the audience in this building. I was being moved like a prop. At the door with the slot, the air had cooled further, the way the air cools near wells. The smell of smoke thinned to the ash trace it leaves on hair. I sat on the floor. I told myself I would put my cheek to the wood and look into the little darkness. I told myself it could not hurt me, not in any ordinary way. My cheek found the paint slick cool, and there in the rectangle beneath the door sat a ceramic bowl, blue glazed, cracked through with age, and full of rice. A strip of dried fish lay on top, a thin coin of ginger. Steam lifted from it. Fresh. The keys, I thought. The guard's brass key. It will open this. I reached into my pocket for it. A whisper bloomed on the other side of the door, too soft to be language. It was the sound of someone who used to speak and had not had anyone to speak to in a very long time. I said the first words that stumbled to my mouth. I know about you. It felt wrong, like telling a child you'd read her file instead of her face. I swallowed. I mean, your story. A long pause, and then the kind of breath a person takes to say something they have not allowed themselves to try aloud in years. In slow, patient Vietnamese, a girl asked, "Which one?" "I know the one everyone tells in the brochures," I said, "and I know the uglier one, the one that people don't want to print. The epidemic, the fear, the lie told to keep face while they slid your meals under a door, the slot like a letterbox." My hand brushed the brass, the whisper thinned to almost nothing. Then, he loved properties, not rooms. I closed my eyes. I knew then that there would be no photograph that could satisfy what was happening here, no article. Only a decision about whether to step toward or away from it. Can I open the door? I asked. Silence. Then the faintest scrape, as if a fingernail had touched the wood just where my forehead leaned. You can, she said, but you may not leave. I stood, hand on the key, heart a one-note drum. From the corridor came a new sound. Metallic, rhythmic, slow. The museum's old elevator, the one Than had told me not to use, groaned to life. Its cage descended like a throat swallowing. I ran to the stairwell rail. The elevator doors yawned open on the ground floor with a rattle like rain. Nobody called it. Nobody stepped out. I could see the entire empty foyer from up here. The reception desk where the lamp threw a polite circle of light, the shadow of the guard chair like an unoccupied throne. There was no one to save me from my own curiosity. When I turned back, the portrait on the landing had changed. Not its paint, of course, that was impossible, but the light across it. The girl's eyes had lost their shine. The varnish had gone dull, as if a cloud had passed between us. I kept thinking of a phrase I'd heard from an old conservator once. Varnish blooms, when moisture gets into a painting and it blushes with a matte haze you cannot rub away. On the wall near the bedroom door hung the father's portrait. Hui Bi Hua, in a western suit, hand on a rolled blueprint, a city like a chessboard behind him. In the museum's stillness, I began to hear something beneath the elevator's old breath, the smallest drafting of rope against wood. A curtain? No. In this corridor, the curtains were pinned back. Above my head, a beam crossed the ceiling like a shoulder shrugging up. From it, almost invisible in the dim, hung the thin curve of something that had not been there before. I did not let my eyes focus. I would not give it the shape it wanted. You were alone, I said to the door, until you weren't. The whisper on the other side grew steadier, the way a flame steadies when you place your hands around it. They said I was bad luck. They thought shame was contagious. They kept my name. They gave my illness one instead. They kept the house. They gave me a room. There is a way of being spoken to in the dark that rearranges your sense of size. I felt large and small at once, an intruder and an instrument. What do you want me to do? I asked. You hold keys, she said. To the door, to the story, both. If I open it, I said, will it set you free? I am not what needs freeing, she whispered. The lie is. The electric lights in the ceiling soffit flickered. One went out with a sound like an insect hitting a screen. The smell of smoke strengthened, but it did not carry heat. I realized then that the elevator's rattle had stopped, and yet its echo seemed to continue inside my bones. The open cage waited for a passenger it would not get. Behind me, fabric brushed my shoulder. I had to bite my tongue to keep from making a sound like a child's. I turned, and the thing that had touched me was only a hem, a curtain that had come loose from its tie-back. It trailed like a pale hand. It would have been ridiculous to be afraid of fabric, if not for the shape the air had given it, a noose blown in cloth. The photograph I took at that moment came out broken, a smear of light. Not an error of exposure. Something had touched the camera itself, as if to push my hand. Fire, she said, so softly I thought I had imagined it. What? They said I burned. They said I hanged. If a story has two endings, people pick the one they like. No one picks the one where I lived and was a daughter, and someone sang to me through the door until he had to go home, and the bowl scraped tile, and the fish was always too salty, and the ginger made my mouth sting, and the sky outside changed color without me. No one picks the ending where I waited and went strange with waiting. There is a third thing, she said, and now her voice had the firm edges of someone who had practiced this sentence too many times to count. The third thing is that a lie eats a house from the inside. It must be fed. The lacquered box inside the glass case had turned again. Its lid, which had faced the slot, now faced me. It was open. Inside lay a coil of hair, neatly bound with a strip of red silk. The portrait of the father watched. His eyes had been painted with a little fleck of light in each, the trick every portraitist uses, but the flecks had thickened, gone bead bright, like lacquer dropped onto lacquer. He seemed to be looking not at me but past me, to the door. I knew then what the true threat was, and it did not have the shape that human fear prefers. It was not a girl who had been harmed. It was the harm made into architecture, the rooms, the doors, the slot, the system of silence. That was what wanted me, not to kill me, but to fold me into its upholstery. Another hush. Another careful card with the wrong words. I put the key in the lock. The metal turned, and the lock sighed like breath. The temperature changed. A current of air, cool and damp soft, lifted the hair on my arms. The door did not open on its own. I put my palm to it and pushed. The room inside was not a gallery. The museum had left it as it had been, down to the bowl on the floor, and the low table with its chipped corner, and the wall where the smoke had written its cursive. The window at the far end was shuttered from the outside, a slatted blind that held back the living city. Beneath the window a narrow bed stretched, so smooth it might have been ironed by ghosts. On the bed sat the girl from the portrait, but not the one from the case reflection. She was both and neither, her skin too even, her hair too black, the way the dead become ideal in memory. She looked up as if she had expected me not to come and was disappointed to be wrong. "You should close it," she said, nodding toward the door. "If I do," I said, "I won't be able to open it again, will I?" Her mouth tugged at its corner, a humor without pleasure. "You learned fast." I left it open. I stepped into the room, keeping the door in my peripheral vision the way swimmers keep the shore in theirs. The bowl on the floor steamed. I knelt to it and felt heat. I wanted to smash it. I wanted to carry it into the corridor and fling rice across the tiles like a blessing. I did neither. "What is the third thing?" I asked. "You know," she said. "The truth." "The telling of it," she corrected. "The telling out loud. Inside here, even truth grew mold." The museum's settling noises had grown silent, as if the building were listening at the crack of the door. I could hear my own blood. I could hear the little bounce of my camera strap against my chest. "Say my name," she said. I opened my mouth to ask it, ready to be ashamed for not knowing, for living in a city that eats itself with new names and erases the old, but she shook her head. "You don't need it for me. You need it for out there." The rope above the corridor creaked again, once, a dry hinge sound. The smell of smoke thickened. I went to the window and pressed my fingers through the slats until they found air. The metal was cool and damp. Street noise leaked in. A scooter's distant snarl, a shout, the smack of a ball. So much life pushing against one old room. "Will you help me?" I asked. I didn't mean with the window. I meant with the story that would wait for me in the bright screen of my laptop later, with the editor who would want mysterious illness again, with the descendants of wealth who would accuse me of exploiting a family's grief. I meant with the building, which would try to deny what I had seen by shrinking in my memory until it could be dismissed as the trick of a tired brain. She nodded. And then the building decided. The curtain in the corridor lifted, gently as a hand, and slid through the open door toward me, a length of silk that smelled of laundry and old dust. I backed away. The silk made its shape and looped itself around my wrist with a practiced ease that made my scalp go hot, then cold. I yanked and the knot tightened. The other end of the curtain lifted, rising toward the beam above the door, pulled by no pulley I could see. "Don't fight that," she said. "It is very old and likes to win." My body did not agree. Panic makes a child of us, a child that is pure action. I braced my foot against the bed frame and pulled until the fabric burned my skin. The knot did not slip. The loop above tightened and began to lift. My heels skidded on the tile. Breath is such a crude, visible thing when it is in trouble. The room's edges trembled, went white at their corners. The girl did not touch me. She picked up the steaming bowl of rice and held it beneath the loop that had my wrist. The steam touched the silk. It dampened. It slackened. The knot loosened with the smallest miraculous sigh of fiber-releasing fiber. She lifted the bowl higher, and the loop above us sagged, preferred dryness, let go. I stumbled backward onto the bed. The bowl tilted and some rice slid onto the floor. A single ginger coin came to rest by my shoe, sticky with its own sugar. I began to laugh, horribly, and the sound seemed so ugly in that room that I slapped my own mouth to quiet it. "The house will always try to end with rope," she said. "If you tell it one ending." She set the bowl down gently. "Use fire." "I don't." She glanced toward the corner where a kerosene lamp sat like a prayer. The museum would never have left such a thing outside a case, but there it was, as if the room insisted on being itself again. My hand found the lamp's handle. The small flame inside shuddered, an animal that wanted out. I lifted the glass. Heat feathered my knuckles. I pressed the edge of the silk curtain toward it. The flame's mouth took hold. The fabric drank fire quickly, like something thirsty. The smoke it made did not smell like cloth. It smelled like hair. It smelled like a story. The corridor coughed with light. The rope above the door flinched away from it, withdrew into shadow as if scolded. In the father's portrait, a hairline crack shot through the lacquer like a vein. "Leave the door open," the girl said. "Do not take anything, not even my hair." She nodded toward the lacquered box in the case outside. "I wasn't going to," I said. I had been. "And when they ask you to soften it," she said, "do not." The lamp was hot in my hand. I set it down on the floor and swallowed the singe in my throat. The girl's face had changed, less polished now, less spare. She did not look like a painting. She looked like a person who had cried enough to burn the salt right out of her. "Will you be?" I searched for a word that wasn't free because it felt like the wrong shape, like a key for the wrong lock. "Will you be less alone?" She tilted her head as if listening to the street. "Alone and together are not the only two," she said. "There is witnessed." I took my camera and photographed the room, the bowl, the window slats, the slot, the scorch like handwriting on the wall. The pictures would not prove anything to anyone who did not already believe. But I would have them for myself, for the night when I would lie and tell myself it had been a performance of fear. I backed into the corridor. The silk burned to ash that drifted and did not fall, that hung in the air like black snow and then was gone. The house rearranged its face. The smell of smoke slid into the museum's usual perfume of shellac and stone. Down on the ground floor, the elevator coughed, and the doors juttered shut with a clatter like a closing book. I left the door open. I took the south staircase. On the first landing, the portrait of the girl had recovered its shine. She looked past me this time, toward the window and the street, her painted eyes wearing a new brightness that could be trick or accident or varnish or grace. The guard looked up when I stepped into the foyer, more surprised than he meant to show. "You finished early." "Early?" I glanced at the clock above the reception desk. 2 hours had become 6. Dawn leaked into the courtyard in a thin, blue wafer. Birds were loud in the banyans. Than frowned at the smell of smoke clinging to me. "Did you?" "There was dust on the fixtures," I lied quickly without thinking, and the lie burned my tongue. "Sorry." He nodded toward the doors. The city wakes. Outside, Pho Duc Chinh Street poured itself into morning. I stood by the curb with my camera bag and felt the building's gaze on my back. When I turned to look, the window shutters on the third floor were open. Just a sliver. Just enough to prove that someone had touched them. I filed the article that afternoon. I used her father's name and the year the house was built, and I used the word leprosy without euphemism, and I wrote about bowls and slots and shame like weather, how it seeps into stitching and comes for you even in sleep. I made the magazine's fact-checker miserable with footnotes. I ignored my editor's request to replace leprosy with a stigmatized disease, citing sensitivity, and I ignored the suggestion to swap locked for quarantined. I did not use mysterious illness. When I sent the final draft, my hands shook the way they had in the room, because telling a story is also an opening of a door. The publication came out 2 weeks later. I went back to the museum with a copy folded to the page like a letter I wanted to deliver. The guard was different this time. The shutters on the third floor were wide open. In the sitting room case, the lacquered box faced the street instead of the slot. The little card no longer said mysterious illness. It said something else in simple language that made my throat ache. I stood beneath the landing portrait and tried to see a change in her mouth, in the tilt of her head, the way you look for permission in the eyes of a photograph. Visitors jostled past me. Someone's phone chimed a cheerful song. A child pressed fingerprints onto the glass, a constellation of sticky stars. In the evening at home, I slid rice into a small bowl and set it by my kitchen window. I do not know if it was superstition or respect. I do not know if there is a difference. In the night, I woke from a dream of curtains and a slow elevator, and in the quiet that followed, I heard the gentle clink of ceramic on tile, the sound a bowl makes when it is lifted and set down carefully so as not to be heard, a sound practiced into politeness by long use. My apartment has no slot in the door, but some nights, when the city hushes so completely it feels like a held breath, I hear someone walking the corridor outside my room, bare feet, quick and soft, and the footsteps do not stop when I stop, do not pretend they are mine. They go on, as if toward an open window, as if toward a street that is at last allowed to be heard. I arrived in Pontianak at the colorless hour before dawn, when the river wakes before the city. The boatman killed the engine and let the current turn us, and the world slid into view like a negative developing in a tray, stilts and steps, plank walkways, the silhouettes of mangrove roots knitting the banks together. Somewhere upstream, the Kapuas met the Landak like two dark veins braided under the skin of the swamp, and the water took on a sluggish, oily sheen that felt less like river and more like mood. "Don't hang laundry at night," the boatman said, as if it were a greeting, "and if you smell Cambodia, Plumeria, stay inside." His voice drifted behind me with the mosquito fog. By the time I turned back, he had already pushed off, swallowed by a bend as smooth as sleep. I had come because of a story. Indonesian folklore has so many ghosts that they seem less like characters and more like weather, always there, changing names as you cross provinces. But the Pontianak, the Kuntianak, she was singular. The vengeful spirit of a woman dead in childbirth or dead wronged, who slipped between trees and roof beams, who smelled like flowers until you realized it was rot. I'd read about her in academic journals, in tourist pamphlets, in fevered forum threads where usernames went quiet in the middle of sentences. I had booked a room in a stilt house at the edge of a neighborhood where the planks groaned like old men and nights were longer than they should be. I told myself I was here to collect stories, to record interviews, to walk the museum where the first sultan's cannons were supposed to have been fired into the swamp to clear the spirits, to listen with a respectful skepticism I'd honed like a blade. The house belonged to a fisherman named Idris and his daughter Lila. She was the one waiting for me on the porch, a woman near my age with sleep-mussed hair and river-wet eyes. A plumeria tree leaned over the veranda like a concerned aunt, its heavy white flowers cupped with yellow hearts. Lila touched the trunk as if to soothe it. "Your room is at the back," she said. "Mama used to hang her sarong there, but not at night." They had prepared a bed draped with a mosquito net that made the entire room look like it belonged to someone careful and loved. On the wooden beam above the headboard, someone had hammered in a row of nails bent backward to form hooks. An assortment of objects hung from them: an iron key the size of my palm, a small woven basket, a rusted fish hook tied to red thread, and what looked like an old nail hammered into a charm and strung with cloth. It had a flared head like a black mushroom and a shaft worn smooth by fingers. Lila saw me looking. She reached up and touched the nail, then lowered her hand. "It's to keep her out," she said, "or keep her in. Depends who you ask." "Your mother believed in that?" "Everyone believes," she said, "even those who say they don't." I slept for 3 hours, dreamed of swimming in water warm as blood and sweet as flowers. When I woke, the day had settled into the slow heat of late morning, and the city beyond our neighborhood buzzed with a different sort of life. Motorbikes, vendors, the distant bells of the mosque. I spent the afternoon in the museum where labels spoke of Sharif Abdurrahman al-Qadri's trading post at the confluence, and the docents in pale uniforms rattled off dates. 1771 to 1808. Cannons fired into the marsh to scatter a nest of ghosts. One glass case held a bronze cannon with a mouth black as a well. Another display described the founding of the Grand Mosque, its pillars cut from Belian wood that still smelled faintly of sap. When I asked about the Pontianak, the docents did their trained shrug, neither confirming nor denying. Outside, an old Dayak woman selling boiled peanuts tapped the side of her nose with a fingernail the color of old copper. "It is better to tell your laundry to sleep inside," she said. "She likes the smell of cloth that remembers the body." That evening, I walked back across plank bridges slick with algae. The sky swapped out blue for bruised purple. Frogs began their metallic ticking. Lila was on the steps rinsing small fish in a basin. The plumeria tree shook once, although the air was still. "You went to the museum?" she asked. "They keep a cannon like a pet. They still fire them sometimes," she said. "For festivals, for remembering. But the swamp remembers better than us." I asked about her mother, because grief is a way people talk about other things. Lila rinsed, head bowed, and told me in the small voice reserved for the dead. Hemorrhage, fever, the sort of blood loss the river might drink and not notice. After, she touched the back of her neck, just below the hairline, and I saw a sliver of dark metal there, fastened like a hairpin. Not jewelry, something older. A nail carved thin, its head recessed against her skin, wrapped in thread the color of turmeric, the kind of thing you inherit because your mother says so, and you obey without asking until one day the reason is gone, but the nail remains. It helps with headaches, she said, catching me looking, and then she smiled, quick and thin, or with other things. That night in the mosquito-netted room, I remembered every warning at once and forgot them the moment my shirt stuck to my back. The heat turned sleep into something I had to deserve. Sweat rolled down my ribs like ants. I stood at the window and breathed the river until my head lightened. On impulse, I rinsed my shirt in the basin and wrung it out, hung it on a line by the open shutters. The fabric lifted and fell as if it were breathing. On the air, the sweet, bruised scent of Plumeria, so clean it seemed it must be lying. I closed the shutters. I told myself the tree was just a tree. That was when I heard the first knock, not from the door, from the walls themselves. 3 faint taps, spaced like words you would whisper in the ear of someone you wanted to wake gently. I waited. The house waited with me, the mosquitoes weaving a high, persistent thread in the corner of the net. The taps came again, closer to the window, then a little laugh, the sort of sound you make when your fingers skim a surface you did not expect to be cool. I told myself it was the woods settling after the day's heat. I climbed back into bed and closed the net and lay still while the universe breathed around me. A drifting sound found me as I was falling, a baby crying. The oldest trick, the mind wants to go to it. One is a leash we put on ourselves. The mosquito net brushed my cheek as if something outside had plucked it. My shirt swayed. I smelled flowers so thick the sweetness turned stomach sour. I slept anyway. Desire is exhaustion's cousin. I woke at gray light with my mouth open and a taste like pennies. Lila's voice was a murmur in the next room. Something thudded softly as if placed down with care. When I rose and went to the window, my shirt was gone. "You hung it out, didn't you?" Lila said when I asked at breakfast. She stirred rice porridge and did not look up. "I forgot." "She doesn't," Leela said. We spent the day as if it were any other. Idris ferried baskets and disappeared toward the market, his boat's engine shredding the river into frowns. I recorded Lila reading a story in Bahasa about a woman who kept a nail by her bed because when she slept without it, the dreams opened like windows and someone stepped inside. When she finished, she laughed and hid her face behind her hands, embarrassed at the sound of her own voice. We ate jackfruit. The Plumeria tree dropped a flower onto the steps, and the petals bruised brown where they struck. Around dusk, I carried a chair to the veranda and set my recorder on the armrest to capture the twilight voice of the river. Frogs, geckos, a motorbike far off like a saw cutting bone. The air hung on me, heavy as a damp blanket. Somewhere a neighbor beat a rug. Somewhere a child sang a song I didn't know the words to. I closed my eyes and felt the night come close. The smell returned first. Plumeria, then something under it like meat gone wrong. The hairs on my arms rose as if each wanted its own look around. I opened my eyes and saw her across the narrow waterway, half in shadow, half in the light that was neither sun nor moon yet. She could have been any woman sitting on her own steps. Long hair. A dress that could have been white or simply less dark than the dark, the fabric clinging in damp places, loose in others. Hands folded in her lap. She lifted her head and looked directly at me, and that should scare anyone, but there was something in her face, curiosity, grief, that pinned me in place. The scent thickened. Behind my ribs, something fluttered as if it wanted to go to her. A small, practical part of me noticed that her feet did not quite touch the ground. "Hello," I said before I could think better. Her head cocked. The Plumeria tree's leaves whispered as if lips ran across them. "Don't," Lila said in my ear, though she was still 2 steps inside, rinsing cups at the basin. The way she said it, without breath, without voice, was a miracle of quiet. "Come in." I did what she asked because fear, when it is clean, obeys. We shut the door. We did not speak until the motorbike distant saw receded, until the night settled back into its burrow. Only then did Lila say, in the smallest voice I had heard from her yet, "Sometimes she looks like someone we love." "Who does she look like to you?" "My mother," she said, and then she put her hand to the back of her neck. Her fingers hovered over the nail set there as if warming it with a small flame. That night, the knocking returned with intention. It moved like intelligence. From the base of the wall to the corner near the floor, up the beam beside the bed, and then the smallest tap at the net, a fingernail's kiss. I lay still because terror is a predator that hunts on movement. The perfume came in waves, a cough syrup sweetness dragged over something sour. My recorder, on the chair beside me, lit once as if it had received a soft sound. Between the taps, a thread of a voice slipped through the weave in a tone I felt in my scalp rather than heard. Open. I slept finally because there is a limit to how long a human can hold an idea without it cutting their hand. Sometime in that slow drowning, a cry braided into the air. Not my name, but near it, and pulled me back up. In the doorway stood Lila. She was not looking at me. Her eyes were downcast the way you look when a headache clamps your skull in a rough hand. The nail at her nape had loosened. The thread binding it gleamed with damp. Something about the way she held her head made me think not of pain but of permission. "Can you?" She winced, fingertips grazing the nail. "Can you help me? She did not finish. She did not need to. All my civilized suspicions dissolved into a simple desire to relieve her. I stood in the net's doorway and reached out because to do otherwise when someone is suffering is to disobey something inside you. Up close, I could smell her skin clean and human under the Plumeria rot notes. I could see where the small shaft disappeared into an old scar at the base of her skull, how it had been shaped thin, how it sat like the quietest of guardians. "It's nothing," I said, because we say that to make bravery easy. I pinched the nailhead and pulled. The room changed in a way that had nothing to do with air pressure and everything to do with attention. The walls inhaled. The net behind me swayed. Lila's spine arched, not in pain, not exactly, but in a ripple like something long confined rolling its shoulders. Her head came up in a slow, unpopular dance. Hair fell in a glossy sheet. She turned her face toward me, and every muscle in mine wanted to bow. She was beautiful, the way a river is beautiful, which is to say she was not concerned with my survival. Her lips trembled into what could have been gratitude. Her eyes, dark, glossy, wet as fish, reflected a pinprick light in each pupil that felt like seeing a star at the bottom of a well. The smell pushed at me, sweet as sugar, then slid and became rot. My stomach lifted like a hand looking for purchase. The nail was between my fingers, warm as blood. "Thank you," she said, and the gratitude was real enough to break me. I was thirsty. Lila's voice doubled inside her voice, then went out altogether. The room held two shapes of her at once, the woman I had come to know, and the other, her mouth a little too wide, her nails the length of a lie, her hair moving as if underwater. She smiled, and someone, not me, made a sound like a bird hitting glass. I stepped back without a plan. My heel caught the chair, the recorder clattered, the mosquito net snagged my shoulder, and in that gentle web something sharp kissed my skin and took a bead of blood like a gift. The taste of Plumeria crawled up the back of my throat. I flung the nail toward the beam with the old hooks, a reflex half superstition and half physics. It struck wood and sang a little note. She moved. No, that's wrong. I realized she had never stopped moving, and my brain only now caught up. In one step, she was where the net lipped open. In two, she had lifted a hand. The claws, call them what they were, curved like their own idea of hunger. Somewhere outside, the river slapped the stilts, and it sounded like applause. "Please," I said to her, to Lila inside her, to the nail embedded in the beam, to any old ghost cannons that might care. My hands found the chair again, and then the recorder. My thumb smashed a button I could have found blind. The last thing I had recorded was the dusk, the frogs, the geckos, the child singing, and now those sounds burst into the room like a vein opening. Beneath them, far away, the baby's cry from last night, the way the house had remembered it. The Pontianac's head snapped toward the sound, nostrils flaring. She liked infants, the stories said. She liked the sound of them. I didn't think. I threw the recorder into the far corner. It chittered through its own echo, red light a single eye blinking, and she went after it with a motion so quick it built its own wind. I ran. The hallway was a throat. I shoved myself down. My bare feet slammed the plank floor. The house, insulted by this, rattled its joints. I reached the front room where Idris kept his gear. Lines rolled neat as sleeping snakes, hooks glinting like small, sharp smiles, a hammer heavy enough to have a point of view. I yanked at a tool roll and iron nails spilled like fish on a deck, hand-forged, long enough to be stakes, old enough to remember other purposes. The cry of the recorder flipped over into feedback. I realized with a hurt animal clarity that I had lured her toward the only light in the house, and that now she was between me and the door. The smell swelled, flour to rot and back again, a tide pulling against my pulse. She came into the room with the calm of a woman who has chosen what she wants at the market. Lila's face surfaced and sank beneath hers like a coin tossed into a well. You keep looking down. You were kind, she said. It makes it easier. How do I make it harder? I asked, and surprised myself by meaning it. She smiled with pity, as if it were not hard already. You could have left your shirt inside. Or I could have hammered the nail back into you, I said, because terror's last gift is a mouth. Her head tipped. Do you know where? For once, I said, lifting the hammer and closing the fingers of my other hand around one of the old nails. I actually listened to a museum label. The thing about stories is that they prepare you, and they don't. They put a picture in your head like a recipe. Woman, hair, hole at the nape, insert iron, say a prayer your grandmother said while kneeling. But they don't tell you how fast the world gets when it wants you, or how your hands shake, or how your grandmother's prayer learned for Latin Mass decides to sear your tongue with the wrong language. I didn't pray. I moved when she did, not because I was quick, but because the body has its own memory for survival. She reached, and I stepped in under the reach the way you do when you hug someone taller, and the hand with the nail flashed up behind her head, while my other arm wrapped her waist and the hammer found the back of the nail by the grace of every old relative watching. Her hair was cold, or it was warm, I can't tell you. It slid like a river, and the smell, God, the smell. I swung. The hammer struck. The nail went home with a sound that felt like stepping from soft mud onto rock. The room shuddered. The Plumeria scent broke like a wave against a seawall. Rot fled like a rumor chased by the truth. She collapsed. Not angelically, not monstrously, just as a person does when someone switches off the electricity to their house. I went down with her, knees smacking wood, chin biting tongue. She lay half in my lap, breath shuddering, that coin face surfacing and staying. Lila's eyes were her eyes again, human and wet and furious the way a storm is furious when it runs up against a mountain and cannot move it. You took it out, she said into my shirt, and it would have been funny if it had not been true, and if we were not both shaking. You asked me to, I said. You asked me to. We stayed like that a long time, longer than either of us will admit later. When she finally pushed away and sat up, the nail at her nape gleamed with a thin smear of my blood from my fingers. She touched it once, and her mouth twisted, but she did not ask me to remove it. She stood slowly, the way you move after an illness that you know has left but that your body does not yet trust. We did not speak of what had happened, because sometimes naming a thing invites it back in through the door. Morning came like a relief that felt almost cheap. Idris returned in a boat rattling with buckets and did not ask about the new gouge in the floor. Lila made rice and we ate it with salted fish in silence. The Plumeria tree dropped 3 flowers in a row. I put my recorder on the table between us and slid it closer to her. You can keep it, I said. Delete what you want. Keep your stories, she said, but don't sell them. I never do. It was almost true. I stayed 2 more days because fleeing is a way to invite pursuit. I kept my shirts inside. I slept with a hammer by the pillow and a nail in my pocket. I learned to distinguish the layers of the night. Frog, gecko, rain shuddering on a far roof, a soft tapping that might have been wood, or something that wanted me to call it wood. Once, in the minutes before sleep, I smelled Plumeria so pure it could have been cut with a knife, and then it slipped under and dragged rot up with it, and I sat up with my tongue thick. Lila, in the next room, breathed evenly, the nail at her nape winking like a small, hard star. On my last morning, the boatman came early. He tied up and hopped to the step and wrinkled his nose. Plumeria, he said. It rains them at the end of the month. Lila walked with me to the edge of the plank walkway, past the tangle of mangrove roots that looked like hands. The nail at her neck hid under her hair, and for a moment I could pretend I had dreamed the way her mouth had widened. She pressed something into my palm. It was a nail like hers, thin and old, wrapped in turmeric yellow thread worn to white in places. "If you write about us," she said, "put this in the first sentence." "Is that how the magic works?" I tried to make it light. "It's how being remembered works," she said. The boatman revved the engine, and the river opened a mouth to take me. As we pulled away, I looked back, because we always do. Lila stood under the Plumeria tree. It shed a flower right then as if on cue, a white handkerchief dropped by a woman withdrawing from a window. Lila's hand went to the back of her neck. Her fingers hovered and then withdrew. When the boat swung onto the main body of the Kapuas, the air changed from swamp to river, from the intimacy of wood to something like sky. The city gathered itself in front of me, minarets, clutter, the museum holding its cannons quietly like old men sleeping in chairs. People in this world do things like establish trading posts where they are warned not to, fire iron into the marsh to clear spaces for markets and prayers. They make laws like don't hang your laundry at night, and then they break them because heat or pride or forgetfulness opens the door. At home, across the sea, I keep the nail on a hook above my bed. I could claim it's there out of respect for the people who lent me their fear and let me carry it away in a notebook. I could say it's an artifact, a souvenir, the way some people keep stones from beaches. The truth is simpler and embarrassing. Sometimes I wake at the hour when the river wakes, and I smell Plumeria so sweet it should heal a heart. And then underneath it, rot. On those nights, I lie still and listen to my house breathe. When the tapping starts, polite as a question, I touch the nail with my finger and whisper to the wood, to the old cannons, to a woman tamed and untamed by a sliver of iron, not tonight. And because stories work until they don't, the tapping moves away, for now. The nail's thread loosens by degrees, only metal understands. The river in its dream keeps two names and one hunger. Somewhere far from my bed, cloth moves on a line in a draft no one can feel. I keep the hammer under the pillow. I never, ever leave my laundry out. I arrived in Cayenne State on a bus that coughed up dust and prayers in equal measure. Pa'an's limestone spires rose like kneeling giants from the paddy fields, and the air was a damp hand on the back of my neck. I'd come as a documentarian with a stubborn streak, interested in how people lived with their dead, how they folded spirits into the plain cloth of daily life. "Stay at Da Maya Maya's," my fixer had said. "It's near the cemetery." He'd said it as if near were a good thing. Da Maya Maya's house sat behind a row of tamarind trees whose seed pods looked like crescent moons, dull against a sky the color of wet slate. One wall of the stilted house faced the village, tidy with little courtyards and laundry hung like prayer flags. The other faced the cemetery, a corrugated sea of stone and earthen mounds trimmed with plumeria. A fence ran between, more ornamental than protective. Bamboo stalks lashed together with faded ribbons, many of them yellow. Puppies thudded around the stilts and collided with tin bowls. The smell of old incense came through everything. Through wood, through mosquito nets, through the skin. "Yellow for her," Da Maya Maya told me, tapping a ribbon at the top of the stairs. Her finger had the squashed look of a healed break. "For Ma Fei Hua, for the yellow ribbon lady. You mustn't touch them." She spoke a mix of Burmese and English that skipped like a stone, and when she said the spirit's name she lowered her voice, not out of fear exactly, but politeness. One didn't shout about someone who stood on both sides of the fence. I promised I wouldn't touch anything. Then I set my pack in the corner of my room and touched everything. The polished bowl of the water jar, the netted window frame, the slat of floor that looked looser than the others. I took photographs of the ribbons and the fence. I told myself it was harmless, documentation, not desecration. There were signs nailed to several doorposts in the lane, signs I had read about before I came. They were simple boards painted with a single line. "Our baby's flesh is bitter, but the dog's flesh is sweet." The letters slanted as if written while looking over one's shoulder. A black dog slept beneath one of the signs, its collar looped with, of course, yellow. That night, the village simmered to a hush. Children's laughter drained away, cooking fires guttered. A monk's chant stitched across the fields and unspooled into the dark. The puppies under the house became one steady, sleepy breathing. I lay on the woven mat and watched gecko shadows chase each other like punctuation across the ceiling. The humidity made its own weather. I dozed. A sound woke me that was so faint it was almost a memory. It was the scrape of wood on stone. Not a harsh noise, troubled rather. I listened, and like a person trying to pick out a friend's voice in a crowded room, I found it again. Scrape, pause, scrape. I sat up. The mosquito net swayed. In the distance, a dog yelped, and then, as if someone had put a thumb on a switch, went quiet. I told myself it was a bucket somewhere, a door that had loosened in the swelling heat. But the scrape came again, closer now, and with it a sudden, strange perfume, sweet and tender as a bruise, frangipani and something damp, the inside of a clay jar. I slid from the mat and crept to the window. The cemetery crouched on the other side of the fence, its plumeria blossoms pale coins in the moonlight. A passing cloud gave the moon a cataract. In that watery light, I saw it, something like a silhouette among the graves, moving with a soldier's patience. Barefoot, long hair that had its own weather. On her shoulder, a box. It wasn't large enough to belong to a grown man, nor small enough to be a trinket. It was a coffin. My mouth dried, and I tasted the wood of the window frame. She moved from stone to stone, as practical as a washerwoman. At the fence, she paused and turned her head not toward me, but toward the houses. Then she leaned her cheek against the coffin in a gesture almost tender, shifted her grip, and with a careful hitch, she stepped through the gap in the bamboo. I didn't breathe. I think I wanted to speak, to say something rational that would make it stop, and found there was nothing in my throat but heat. The woman never looked at me. She moved down the lane between houses, the ribbons and signs flitting in and out of the dim. When she reached a door whose sign had split diagonally around its nail, she set the coffin on the threshold and rested her palms upon it. That was all. Then she straightened. The hair along my arms crackled. She walked on, and the scrape went with her. I slept badly and rose late. Da Maya had already set tea on the table, a sweetness that clung to my tongue. Her eyes skipped away from mine when I tried to speak. Dreams come heavy the first night, she said, which is not the same as saying dreams don't come at all. You go to the monastery. Uzan will bless your camera, and your mouth. She smiled without showing teeth. Uzan, the abbot, was small as a cracked bell and twice as sure. He listened while I told him what I had seen and didn't recoil. There are 37 great gnats, he said almost absent-mindedly, tracing a circle on the bamboo table with his finger, and thousands of others besides, gnats of river, gnats of the thunder, gnats of the last breath. This one, Mafaiwa, she doesn't claw and bite. She simply lays a door where a door will soon be needed. That is her mercy. Then she doesn't. I hesitated. She doesn't kill? Do you blame rain for the flood? He asked. She is the smell before the storm. The yellow ribbon is a warning. His gaze snagged me, suddenly sharp. You did not move any ribbons, did you? No. The lie came easy. He nodded as if accepting, but something in his eyes dimmed. This is her hour, he said quietly. Not now, not noon. Midnight. Midnight belongs to the ones with no breath to fog the air. If you hear her, you keep your door closed. If she lays her box at your step, you make offerings to the dogs. You tie more yellow. You do not open the lid. I laughed in a way that didn't reach my lungs. Do they always die? The house she marked last night. Someone will, he said. Usually a child, but sometimes the one who thinks they are far from such things. He poured tea and then, as if remembering, added, Once a monk dreamed she would eat babies. We told the mothers to leave signs, the one you saw, and feed the strays. We made bargains. Bargains are nets. You can catch water for a while, but not forever. I left the monastery with a string of marigolds tied around my wrist, and the abbot's words like stones in my pocket. I told myself I would keep my door closed, that my documentarian curiosity would sit like a well-trained dog at heel. It didn't. The dogs didn't either. That evening, as the heat thundered out of the day, the black dog from under the sign appeared at the edge of Da Maya's yard and refused the scraps she offered, which made her cluck her tongue. They know, she said. They always know first. At dusk, I went to the lane and photographed the signs. No flash, no laughs, just a sequence of small truths. At one doorway, a ribbon had frayed to threads. When I reached to straighten it for the shot, it came loose like a lizard's tail. I meant to tie it back, truly I did, but my hands made a clumsy knot, and then it slipped again. And then a child in the next yard cried, and someone called my name, and I tucked the ribbon into my pocket without thinking, as if I'd return it later. A bit of color, a prop for an interview. I told myself it was a researcher's instinct. I told myself a lot of things. The second night came in like smoke. The same scrape woke me, but the perfume was stronger. Plumeria on a threshold, damp earth turned with a shovel. I went to the window and saw her again, her movement a patient arithmetic in the dark. This night the dogs did not yelp. They were silent the way a field is silent when a hawk is overhead. Everything waiting, nothing foolish. There's a particular sound a wooden box makes when it touches a wooden stair. It's more a question than an impact. I heard that sound on our steps, not distant anymore, and the sound rolled up through the slats beneath my mat. My heart crawled up after it and tried to get into my throat. I pictured yellow ribbons, ribbon in my pocket, Maya asleep in the next room with her hair braided like a rope across the pillow. The question came again, the box touching the next stair and the next. I did not open the door. I don't know who moved my feet, but they moved, and I found myself holding the crossbar like a person trying to keep a boat against its mooring in a current. Through the cracks I saw hair. It was not glossy, not theatrical, just hair that had not seen scissors in a very long time. And through the hair, the edge of the box, its iron nails like moles on the skin of it. The box settled against the door so gently, I thought for a moment it would slide away, and the breath I was holding would be released. It did not. It waited. She waited. The voice, when it came, had no anger to it. It was wind through bamboo and a woman speaking across a kitchen table. "You carry me tonight," she said. I didn't know if she meant me or the box or both. I should have been terrified. I was. But there was a tiny bead of something inside the terror, a hard little seed, and it was outrage. I had obeyed. I had stayed quiet. If the coffin was on our step, if she had chosen this door, then the bargain had failed, or I had. I thought wildly that I could pick up the box and carry it anywhere else and the story would change. The door's crossbar slid back with a sound like a match failing to strike. I opened it a crack, enough to see her profile in the tilt of midnight. Cheekbone, eyelash, the long taut string of her hair. The frangipani scent poured through as if the air had a seam there. She didn't look at me. Her gaze trimmed the edges of the world. "Leave the coffin," I said, my voice small. "Please." "It is already left," she said. "I'll take it back," I said recklessly. "I'll carry it for you, to the cemetery, to anywhere, just not here." She turned then, not her face exactly, but the idea of her face, and I understood why the stories called her a guardian. There was nothing ghoulish there, only duty worn thin as silk. "Do you know what is inside?" she asked. "There's nothing inside," I said. "It's a warning, a mark." "A door," she said gently. "A door before a door." She lifted her hand, and in her palm lay a twist of yellow cloth. My breath snapped in my chest. The ribbon from the sign, my ribbon. "You broke the net," she said without blame. My mouth found the braver question. "If I carry it, if I carry you, will you leave the baby alone?" The family next door had a newborn. I'd watched the mother sway on the step as she hummed, the baby a small knot at her shoulder. The thought of that small knot unraveling, no, nothing in me could hold it. "The child is already safe from me," she said. "It is the living who made their own hunger." She tilted her head toward the lane. In the distance, a truck coughed, a machine coughed, the kind that pulled stumps and shivered old stones. "Men will cut the trees so the floods come faster. They will drain the well and call it progress. They poisoned the dogs so their nights could be quiet." Her voice was a river wearing down its bed. "I am not the hunger, I am the announcement." It should have comforted me. It didn't. Human hands could be crueler than any gnat, and their motives were always accounting. "Then why my door?" I whispered. Her hair lifted though the night was still. "Because you knew, and you lied. You saw the knot, and you pulled at it. You carry the ribbon." From her palm she offered it. In that moment the terror broke like a wave and left clarity behind. I did not feel chosen so much as caught. I took the ribbon. It was warmer than it should have been. "If I tie it," I said, not sure on what clause my bargain should hang. "If you tie it," she said, "you carry the door and not the house. You will leave while they still have time to mend what is broken. You will take your talking box. she meant my recorder, and your questions and your feet that do not know our paths. You will go before dawn. If you do not tie it, you will lie down inside. Either way, the door will be used. The coffin's wood had a sheen under the moon, the faint, oily bloom that comes to objects that have known many hands. For a mad second, I thought of opening it, to prove it empty, to see what lay behind the stories. But I heard Uzan's voice as if he were behind me in the dark. You do not open the lid. I tied the ribbon around my wrist first and then, in a humility that felt like kneeling, around my throat. It was not tight. It sat there like a promise. The yellow ribbon lady, Ma Fei Hua, tilted her head as if acknowledging a gesture well made at a funeral. She placed her palm on the coffin lid. The wood brightened and then was wood again. Carry it, she said. I lifted. It should have been impossible, but the box was light as a bed rolled for storage. Light the way a name is light until you speak it aloud and it fills the room. I carried it down the steps and into the lane. The dogs did not bark. The signs shivered on their nails. Behind one of the doors, a baby hiccuped in its sleep and sighed, and the sigh made something painful and wet open behind my sternum. At the cemetery fence, I paused. Nothing separated night from night here but bamboo and intention. I set the box down and turned. She was there, not shadow and not woman. Go, she said, and her voice was so human then I looked for her lips and found only the thought of lips. Before you become important to this place. I had questions, I said stupidly, because curiosity is a weed. Ask the living, she said. They are the ones who decide. I left at gray light with my pack and my recorder, the yellow at my neck itching like a healing scar. On the bus out of Shpan, the villages thinned to fields. The fields spilled into river. The river gathered itself between coasts and dragged the sky with it. A dog ran the length of a dirt road, then stopped and watched, tail twitching, as if it could smell a hungering future on the wind. In Malamyin, I mailed my tapes to myself and didn't play them. In Yangon, I left a string of marigolds on a temple step and told no one what for. On the plane, I slept and dreamed of a box light enough to hold with one hand, heavy enough to make a dent when placed on your life. Back home, the ribbon still around my throat like a necklace I didn't remember choosing. I wrote everything down. I made a list of questions for the living, like she had told me. Who poisoned the dogs? Who wrote the signs? Who pays for the trucks that cough at night? Letters went out with my name at the bottom and the taste of incense on the paper. Weeks passed. Then a month. The ribbon yellowed the way cloth does when it learns the shape of your body. I woke one night to a sound that was not possible. Wood on the floorboards in my flat. A polite hesitation pressed against my door. The air in my hallway smelled faintly, impossibly, of Plumeria after rain. Somewhere above me, a neighbor's baby laughed and then, startled by its own laughter, cried. I stood in the dark and did not move. My door was closed. On the inside, taped at eye level because superstition always intrudes where scholarship fails, I had hung a strip of paper I wrote the day I returned. Our baby's flesh is bitter. I had stopped short of the second line. I could not offer my dog. I did not have one. The scrape came again. So soft. The ribbon on my throat warmed, as if a hand had touched it, as if I had become what Uzan warned I might, someone close to such things. I whispered into the quiet, ask the living, like a chant against the kind of fear that disguises itself as sleep. Then I stepped back, away from the door, and in the half-light of my hallway, I watched the shadow at the threshold hesitate, soften, and thin to nothing. I did not open the door, not that night. In the morning, there was no box, no marigolds, no yellow hair caught on the latch. Only on the stair was a ribbon. I knew it before my hand reached it, frayed from a sign whose words I could recite now without looking. I tied it, carefully this time, around the leg of the railing where the morning sun could find it, and where my neighbors might pass and read and wonder. A reminder, bright as caution tape and older than me, the dead do not need our fear. It is the living we should watch for, the bargains we make, the little knots we pull for the sake of a better photograph. Somewhere very far away, a lane edged in bamboo, a cemetery with a fence that couldn't keep anything out, a woman with hair that moved like weather laid a palm upon a lid and judged a door complete. She was mercy, she was warning. She was the yellow ribbon lady who made her rounds when the world rehearsed its silences. And I, who had carried her box once, listened to the hush of my flat and told myself the hour belonged to those who did not need to breathe. But the next night, when wind raced the canal and rattled the bicycle bells outside, I thought I heard her again, the clean little scrape of wood on wood, a sound that is barely a sound at all. I turned my face away from the door. I slept, or I dreamed that I did. And in the dream, a fence that had never kept anyone separate shook with yellow like a long, slow warning, bright enough to see before you stepped through. I arrived at the boardwalk a little before midnight with a field mic, a thermos of coffee, and the kind of confidence that evaporates when the sea wind slips under your shirt. Ancol's amusement lights were already going out behind me, shutters clattering down like metallic thunder, the last music thinning into the dark. The bridge ahead, wooden, ribbed, and slightly arched, made a pale curve over the black water. A sign said, "No vehicles." Everyone in Jakarta knew it. This was a pedestrian bridge. If you crossed here, you did it on your own feet. I was recording night sounds for a podcast, a gentle title, Bridges After Dark, and I wanted the texture of this place. The rails were salt-scabbed. The planks were nailed with big iron heads that caught the light. Far out, ship lights winked like insects with unhurried lives. I clipped the recorder to my collar and spoke quietly to mark the tape. Ancol Bridge. After hours, light wind from the bay, hum of a distant generator, no cars, just foot traffic, if there is any. There wasn't, not tonight. The only movement was the tide, shouldering the pilings with patient, wet breaths. I stepped onto the wood. It gave a tired plank sigh, and then a second sound, too soft to be a step and too deliberate to be the wind. I told myself the bridge was speaking its old language. The first lamp was a plain stalk with a warm bulb that hummed. It painted a perfect coin of gold on the boards, and where the coin ended, the dark seemed a little thicker, like water you had to push through. As I crossed into the next pool of light, the smell found me. Jasmine. Melody. Not the muddled sweetness of bottled perfume, but the clean, sharp scent of petals bruised in a warm hand. "Okay," I said, more to my ribs than to the recorder. Noted. The bridge is old enough to have heard all the stories, and I had read the worst of them. A girl in the 1800s, a maid named Mariam, chased and killed by men who thought wanting was the same as owning. People said her ghost walked here, bright as a warning or beautiful as a distraction, depending on who was telling the story and what they feared most. They also said that if you smelled jasmine, you shouldn't look back. The jasmine strengthened. Something light dragged across the wooden slats 2 paces behind me. A hem, a palm. The recorder clicked, the way it does when the sound floor changes. I tried not to turn. I failed. The bridge behind me lay in its quiet circles of light. A scrap of white clung to a splinter on the rail and freed itself just as I saw it, drifting off like a moth wing. My scalp tingled where the wind threaded my hair in the wrong direction, up, not back, like fingers deciding where to part it. I faced forward again and walked slower. The lamps were spaced just far enough apart to train your eyes to hunt in the dark between them. After 3 pools of light, I reached a widening where the rail opened to a small viewing bay. Old candle wax stubbed the boards there, tiers of white, pooled and broken. Someone had set a shallow saucer under the rail, and in it lay the skeletons of 3 jasmine blossoms, brown, dried flat, still perfect in their architecture. Beside them sat a pocket mirror, cloudy, leaned toward the water as if the bridge preferred to see the sea rather than the face of anyone crossing. "Offerings," I breathed too loud. My own voice came back to me off the water, smaller and colder. I knelt to photograph the saucer, and for a second the boards beneath my kneecaps breathed, rising and falling as if something large had exhaled directly under me. When I stood, the saucer's mirror held, for a flicker, more than it should. The lamps behind me and in the thin space between them the pale distortion of a person standing too still. I turned so fast my ankle pinched. No one there. The lamps buzzed. The sea knocked rhythmically. Here, here, here. Jung and Manali, the kiosk owner, had told me when I asked if the bridge was open late. Don't look back. I tried to make a joke for the tape. Rule broken, I said, but my voice had lost its hinge and swung loose. I kept on. The bridge curved, and with the curve came a hush as complete as church. The city's noise fell behind a thick pane. The only sounds were my steps, the small saw sigh of the sea, and the occasional thock of rope against a mooring pin, invisible in the dark. In the third shadow after the offerings, a new sound joined. Footfalls that weren't mine, offbeat to my stride, faint as someone walking in felt slippers. They came close, then lagged, like a child matching a parent's pace for a game. "Mariam," I said. The jasmine blew through me like a door swinging in a draft. A shape became briefly more than air at the edge of the next lamp, white, not shining, but quietly certain, like foam gathered at a rock. The impression of long hair. Bare feet, black at the soles, the suggestion of a cabaya's lace at the wrists. Not close enough to fix a face, and I was grateful for that. The mind is kinder when it can't make a picture. "I'm not here to bother you," I said. "Saya minta maaf. I'm sorry for whatever this night asks you to repeat. If you want." Something touched my shoulder, not weight, direction, a pressure that was also advice. It angled me a degree to the left, away from a board whose nail heads were darker than the others. I stepped where I was told. The next board, the darker one, groaned. It didn't break, but it said a little piece of itself wanted to. "Terima kasih," I whispered before I could think not to, and the jasmine slackened just enough to let me breathe. A soft cough sounded ahead. Human, embarrassed to be heard. I froze and then moved the way you move when you want to look casual, too controlled to pass. Two figures materialized at the far edge of a lamp's warmth. They weren't ghosts. Their body language was immediate and alive. Knees loose, shoulders canted, the geometry of men who feel bigger on a bridge at midnight. One leaned on the rail like he owned the tide. The other rolled something in his palm. The smell of clove cigarettes skirted the jasmine, all sweetness and char. "Malam," the nearer one called. "Evening." His voice was as careful as a pickpocket's hand. "Sendiri? Alone?" "Itu dilarang," I countered, nodding at the faded rule sign as if small talk could be a fence. "That's forbidden. No fishing, no vehicles, no—" I couldn't remember what the third icon stood for, only that it looked like a bird with its wings broken. He smiled in the dark. "Banyak aturan," he said. "So many rules." The jasmine gathered like a second spine in me. I stood taller without meaning to. The men noticed. The quiet one tapped the rail. The sound traveled along the wood like a nerve impulse. Between us was a longer distance than I had thought 5 minutes before. "Mas," the talkative one said. "Recording?" He pointed at the mic on my collar with a friendliness that hands could pickpocket behind. "Ambient audio," I said. "For a podcast. The legends." I could hear myself pretending calm, like someone doing a good impression of a person who does not expect to be shoved. He laughed, the soft, breathy kind that doesn't commit. "Ah, legends." He spat sideways where the water would take it without complaint. "You want real story?" His friend's rolling hand stilled. Before I could decide between yes and no, the bridge decided for us. The lamp above flickered. The wood under our feet tightened, or I imagined it did, like a muscle bracing before a blow. The jasmine surged. A wind slid along the rails against the wind, against it, like a hand stroking fur in the wrong direction. The talkative man flinched and masked it by shifting his weight. His friend didn't bother to pretend. He crossed himself quickly, then smoothed it into scratching his shoulder. The small motion made something metal flash in his palm. Not big, but sharp. The quiet between the lamps deepened until I could hear the tiny frictions of their fabric and the bread knife scrape of my own tongue against dry teeth. Far out on the bay, a foghorn moaned, and the sound arrived weak and late, like a warning in a dream. "Suda," said a voice I didn't hear so much as occupy. Enough. It was right behind me and nowhere. It made the hairs at my nape lift like a field of grass in a sudden breeze. The men heard something, maybe not the word, but the decision. The quiet one stuffed the blade back down his sleeve with an unconvincing laugh. The talkative one spread his fingers a peaceable shape. "Berkanda," he said, and couldn't keep the edge out of it. Joking. A new sound rose then from the boards. Faint wet steps, not crisp like rubber soles, not squashy like boots, but the round clap of bare feet. They came from behind, passed to my right, and kept going into the lamp's pool where the men stood. There was nothing to see, not exactly, but the light looked different, the way air above a hot road wobbles. The men's faces shifted, muscles undone by memory. They looked young, They looked like boys caught in the wrong orchard. One took a step backward, and his heel found a board whose nail heads had risen with a century of salt. The board didn't break. It tilted. He windmilled, recovered, tried to laugh, failed. The other man reached for him and then withdrew his hand a centimeter, as if touching would make something notice. In the gathering smell of jasmine, I remembered the old neat offerings under the rail. Candle wax like old teeth. 3 withered blossoms, a mirror turned toward water. I thought, people have been coming here with their careful little lights for a very long time. They come because light remembers where it was placed. I found my voice. It wasn't brave, but it was steady. Suda, I repeated, the word stiffer in my mouth than in hers, but willing. Enough. The men peeled themselves out of the lamp's circle and fled sideways along the rail, taking the long curve away from me. Their footsteps marked out a rhythm I wished I didn't know. Hurry with dignity, panic in a coat. They didn't run exactly. The bridge didn't let them. Their shapes slipped from one island of light into the next, and finally into a shadow so convincing it was only sea. I stood still for longer than I knew. My breath rehearsed being calm. The jasmine softened until it was only a ghost of itself, a suggestion under the salt and wet wood. My knees noticed that they had been locked and produced a tremble. I broke the spell with hands, the way you do when you don't trust your legs. I reached down and gathered the 3 brittle flowers from the saucer, laid them gently at the seam of 2 boards, and struck my lighter. I lit nothing. I let the flame live by itself for a few slow seconds and then closed it. Mariam, I said, and the name was smaller and more correct spoken to the boards than thrown at the dark. If you're here, I see you. Akuliat Kamu, I'm sorry. I'll tell the story kindly. The pressure returned, not a push, not a pull, just a hand arranging me as if for a photograph. It turned me toward the city end of the bridge. Pulang, it seemed to say. Go home. I didn't argue. I walked, and the bridge corrected my steps twice, once steering me away from another whispering nailhead, once slowing me in front of a gap where a plank had split thin as a letter opener. The lamps were quieter. The sea had fallen into its slow conversation with itself. By the time I reached the beginning, the jasmine was a memory my clothes held the way fabric holds smoke. The kiosk owner was smoking by the shutter when I came off the boards. He looked at me the way fishermen look at the tide, measuring, unsurprised. Masada Rakaman? He asked. You got a recording? I said. A lot of wind. I did not add, and footsteps that didn't belong to me, and a word I didn't say first, and 2 men instructed by something older than their fear. He nodded, as if wind was what he had expected. Kalamau tarubunga, besok pagieja, he said. If you want to leave flowers, do it in the morning. Malam, anjan sukabawa. At night the wind likes to take. At my cheap hotel, I played the audio through headphones while the air conditioner performed its inadequate magic. It was mostly what I described, the wash of water, the lamp's faint insect hum, my own voice, timid and professional. But after the second time I'd said enough. A new texture braided into the sound, so low and thin I had to lean forward to catch it. The friction of silk, the near-silent drape of a skirt moving at speed. It went past me and kept going, 2 steady lines of barefoot claps, light and precise, receding along the planks. I didn't sleep well. In the hour before dawn, I dreamed of a field marked with water and square cells, moonlight lying down in each one like a body, and a girl stepping between them with a balance I couldn't imitate. When I woke, the room smelled faintly of jasmine, then didn't. Before noon, I returned to the bridge with flowers, jasmine bought from a woman whose hands smelled of them and of rice. The bridge looked different in daylight, less haunted, more tired. Children ran ahead of their parents. Teenagers took pictures of each other, pretending to laugh. The lamp that had flickered was ordinary and indecisive. The saucer under the rail was still there. I cleaned the old wax with the edge of a coin and tucked the new blossoms into place. They were small, arrogant stars in the sun. I didn't say anything aloud. The white of the petals said enough. As I turned to leave, my shoulder brushed the rail, and a strand of hair snagged and tugged, sharp then free. I almost looked back. I remembered not to. That night I edited the episode. I left out the men. I left in the footsteps. I described the jasmine and the way the wood breathed, and the way a lamp can make a rule about how much you're allowed to see. I did not decide for the listener whether the sweet girl of Ancol Bridge is a danger or a guardian. I only told them how it felt to be rearranged by an invisible hand into a safer version of yourself. After I uploaded the file, a message appeared from an address that looked like a mistyped word. There was no subject line. The body held only 3 words in Indonesian and then in English. Tulis yang benar. Write it right. I blinked. I thought of autocorrect, spam, coincidence, a friend playing at the supernatural. I thought of white petals pinned briefly under a lighter's flame and then returned gently to dark. I replied with a single line, Saya berusaha, I'm trying. The message bounced. No such account. Sometimes in other cities, on bridges that accept cars and roar with them, the jasmine finds me out of season and place. The stairwell of a parking garage, the mouth of a metro tunnel. It refuses to make a scene. It arrives, lifts, is gone. When it does, I imagine the old wooden slats under Ancol's lamplight, the places where the nailheads have risen, the saucer of wax and water, and the night that shifted around 2 men and told them, with perfect economy, enough. I go back, now and then. I walk the curve like a pen making the same letter until the hand learns. I don't look over my shoulder, not when the wind fingers my hair, not when footsteps answer mine. When I leave the bridge the way I found it, with a little light waiting under the rail and the story placed carefully beside it, the way you place something you intend to return to and find in the same shape as before. I first heard the name Maria Lobo on the bus that took the coastal road past rice paddies and salt pans towards San Roque. It was the kind of rumor that travels in whispers, stitched from fear and boredom, the way folk tales do in places where nights are long and electricity is a suggestion. The driver crossed himself when another passenger said her name, tapping the rosary swinging from the rear view as if the beads might snag the syllables and keep them from reaching our ears. I wasn't here for legends. I was here for work. The barangay health station had sent me to sit nights with a dying man whose children lived in Manila and sent money but not themselves. Hospice is a gentle word, easy in the mouth. The job is not. It is the place where breath has to be coaxed, where bowls have to be held at lips that barely open, where the darkest parts of being human get wiped away by hands that are supposed to be steady. I climbed down at the crossroads with my backpack, a sealed bag of sterile pads, and a bundle of garlic the clinic guard pressed into my hand. For cooking, he said, not looking at me when he said it, and for other things. Beyond the tricycle stand, a narrow path ran along a dike. The sun had just fallen into the sea. The rice fields held its afterglow like the last heat in a dying ember. Houses thinned. Mosquitoes rose in a whining fog. My shoes sank a little in the packed mud between puddles, and the wind brought me a wet, metallic smell, like an opened can of coins. Dogs barked, then fell silent as if someone had slapped a palm over their muzzles. The old house stood alone at the edge of a field overgrown with kogan. Its roof was ribbed tin that had been patched and repatched. Its windows were Capiz shell panes that looked like cloudy eyes. A balete tree leaned over the eaves, the way old people lean to hear. On the porch, a lamp burned low beside a bowl of water with a thin film of oil dancing on it. The woman who opened the door for me had a face made of edges and kindness. Aling Lena, a neighbor hired to keep the place in order until I came. He sleeps, she said softly. Sometimes he wakes and says he cannot. You give him the broth when he says anak. He will call you child even if he does not know you. She touched her throat. He is having trouble letting go. I didn't ask her how she knew. Inside smelled of camphor, old wood, and a faintly sweet rot, as if something had been left out of sight to turn. Icons crowded a shelf. Santo Niño, a chipped Virgin Mary bobbing on a spring, a crucifix draped with rosary beads browned by fingers. The walls were streaked with smoke and weather. In the kitchen, a huge aluminum pot sat on the stove, its lid slightly askew. A whisper of steam rose from the gap and was swallowed by the dim air. I took my shift in a room at the back. The old man lay in a narrow bed under a mosquito net. His skin was the color of parchment soaked in tea. His eyes opened when I sat, and I felt them slide over me the way rain finds a leak. Anak, he breathed. Good evening, Tay, I said. I'm here for you. His mouth worked. No words. His hand uncurled from the sheet and reached toward me, thin and surprisingly hot. A gecko called from the rafters, "Tuco, Tuco," its voice dropping as it echoed, the sound with the uncanny trick of seeming both near and far. I adjusted the lamp wick down and listened to the house. There are noises in every dwelling, but unfamiliar ones prick like needles. The pop of boards, the soft clink of something shifting in a cupboard, the wheeze of wind forced through an unseen crack. The garlic cloves in my pocket were warm against my palm. When night deepened, the rice fields became a black lake. The lamp's circle felt like a trap that suggested safety. I made notes in the chart. It was almost comforting, the neatness of vital signs, the mechanical logic of absorption and excretion, the bureaucracy of the body. At some unmeasured hour, there came a sound like fingernails scraping down the outside of the KP's pane. Thrup, thrup. Slow, as if the nails were long and curved and savoring it. I froze. The sound paused, then resumed, higher on the glass. Then a rattle in the kitchen, a light clink as if the lid of the pot had been tapped by the tip of a spoon. "A knock," the old man whispered, louder, waking. "The broth." Aling Lena had shown me where the bowls were stacked, chipped and clean. I carried the lamp because the kitchen light switch worked only sometimes, and tonight it didn't. The pot was almost too large for my arms when I put my hands on the handles to steady it. I lifted the lid an inch. Steam rolled out in a soft ghost and hit my face in a moist wall. Salt, star anise, something like lemongrass, and underneath it a coppery tang that made me salivate. I told myself it was pork, browned bones. That metallic smell could be from the pot. It could be anything. I ladled broth. It was clear. Fat made little eye-shaped ovals that slid around the surface as if trying to align. On my way back down the hall, someone knocked on the door I had closed behind me. Not a neighborly rap. A polite, exact tap, 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 as if knuckles were arranged just so. A woman's voice came through the wood, the kind with smoke burned into it. "May I come in?" I set the bowl on a table. My tongue felt too big. I thought ridiculously of the clinic guard's face as he pressed the garlic bundle at me. The old man coughed, a dry bark that ended in a wheeze. "A knock," he urged, desperate. "Before the sun goes." "It's past midnight," I said without meaning to. My voice was steady in the small room, in that way voices get when you're talking to yourself. "There is no sun." The woman knocked again, softer. "I know what is inside your pocket," she said. "Salt. Garlic. Do you think I am so old that I cannot taste the shape of fear? I am not here to harm you." A pause, and then, "I am here to keep him from doing it again." I did not move. Behind me, the old man made a sound not like any word I know. It was the sound of something held down too long, a trapped breath turned to a plea. "He wants you to feed him," the woman said gently. "He will open his mouth and say anak, and you will hold the spoon. You will wipe the corner of his lips with your thumb to catch the dribble. You will take it in your hand to your mouth and lick it off, because that is what hands do when they are full. That is the door he needs. He cannot die unless he gives the door to you, child." "Who are you?" I asked. "You know my name." The voice held tired laughter. "Everyone in San Roque knows my name, even if they will not speak it after dark." My mouth shaped it in the lamplight. "Maria." The dog in the yard started again, one bark, then a whine, then silence as if the sound's throat had been pinched shut. The gecko called, and the call moved, louder then fainter, as if it were walking in a circle above my head. That is how the old people used to say you could tell. If the tick-tick sounded far, the thing was already near. "I took care of a man who wanted to die," she said, conversational, almost amused. "He could not die because he had no child who would consent. He had to make a child of me for one night. He gave me a fever that cooked my brain. I woke with a hunger that walked me like a dog. I left the country where it was cold and clean and no one knew my name. I came back and the hunger waited by my bed like a good husband." In the bedroom, the old man began to mutter in a language I didn't recognize. His hands picked at the sheet as if plucking feathers. I lifted the bowl. "You think I am the knife," Maria said against the door. "But it is the hand that will feed him that cuts you. Don't be his child. He made me his. He can make you his. He calls all of us anak. He is everybody's father." Her laugh was brief and without mirth. "He goes from town to town. They call the town cursed. The curse is not a place. The curse is a role." A figure passed across the KP's panes in the hall. a shadow smudging the milky squares, long hair, a scarf on the head, a thin seam of lighter skin angling from cheekbone to jaw, where a blade had once kissed and kept its souvenir. That detail lived in every version of the story. The policeman husband who raised his knife in a kitchen where a pot was already boiling. I didn't look at the pot. I took the bowl to the old man. Up close, his smell was sweet and rotten, a mango forgotten to collapse under leaves. He smiled. His lips were too red. "Anak," he whispered. I lifted the spoon. His mouth opened. The spoon paused. A tiny string of steam curled from the broth like a question mark. My phone, preternaturally silent for hours, vibrated then with a text that somehow found signal. It was from Aling Lena, though she had left hours ago. Only 2 words, stingray tail. I remembered seeing something coiled behind the door when I'd come in. Half a whip and half a memory. Buntot pagi, dried and hung in Aklan and Kapuas houses to help with thieves and things that do not enter doorways like men. I didn't know if superstition could hold the weight of what was waiting in this house, but superstition is only what we call rules we can't explain. The spoon shook in my hand. A drop slid over the rim and grazed my thumb, hot and slick. Reflex raised my hand toward my mouth. I caught the movement halfway. The old man's eyes quickened. He reached for my wrist like a lover. "Anak," he urged, and my name tangled in that word even though he did not know it. The knock on the door became a thud. The latch flexed. Wood creaked the way bone does when it is forced to remember how it breaks. The window at the bed's foot darkened with movement. Hair uncoiled there like smoke. I saw a face flatter than it should be, as if pressed too long against surfaces that did not yield. The scar gleamed silver. The room tightened. The lamplight went low as if someone had breathed across it. My hand moved of its own will toward the bowl again, not to feed him but to set it aside, and I felt my fingertips stick to the handle as if sugar had spilled there. The sugar was not sugar. It tugged. It wanted to keep my fingers. The old man smiled wider. His teeth were small and too many. I stepped back, and my heel hit the whip behind the door. I kicked, and it fell into my hand like a thing that had been waiting for this cue. The leather was rough, stiff with salt the way dried sea stuff is. I snapped it once, clumsy. The sound was not like in movies, a clean crack. It was a low, meaty slap like a fish on a cutting board. Maria laughed from the window, brief again, a kindness given to a stranger. "Don't whack me with it," she said dryly. "Waste your arm on him." I don't know if I expected the old man to flinch. He did not. He rose to one elbow with a youth that was not his and opened his mouth wider. The tongue that showed there was black and thin and forked like the roots that drink at the bases of trees. He said my name this time. Fear is a heat, but it also can be a lever. I swung. The whip caught the mosquito net and tore it down and hit the old man across the shoulder and chest. Where it struck, his skin smoked as if meat were being seared. The smell was new and unbearable, a sweetness that curdled on my tongue. He screamed without sound and clawed at the air. The house moved, roof tin shuddering, Kappa's panes chattering like teeth. The pot in the kitchen slid on the stove and clanged indignantly against its ring. Maria pushed the window higher with one hand. Her other hand came through, long fingers, nails blunt and dark, not claws but something worse. Nurse's nails on a day when gloves ran out. "It is not your fault," she said to me, and there was kindness in it that cut. "He has been making us children since we were slaves in our own homes. It is older than the badge your husband wore." She touched the scar on her own face with the hand not reaching for me. "Older than knives." "I don't have a husband," I said, and the absurdity of declaring it there then made my voice almost a laugh. My arm shook. I swung again. The whip slapped his chest. He grabbed it this time. The leather smoked in his hands. He pulled, and I went forward 2 steps without meaning to, in a jerk that dragged my wrist across the bowl's rim. Heat burned a line over my skin. The pain cantered straight to my brain and bucked there. Maria flowed through the window like smoke becoming woman. I saw the afterimage of something impossible. Shoulders too narrow to carry the weight of her hair, a spine that bent more than spines do. She was in the room and at the bed, and her hand was in the old man's mouth up to the wrist before I could breathe. He gagged. She twisted. He bit down and blood came, darker than it should be. She turned and shoved me hard in the chest with her bleeding hand. Her thumb caught my lower lip, The blood was hot and salt. A drop ran into my mouth. The old man's eyes were on me when the iron taste went metallic and then sweet. He smiled as his own eyes went gray. It was not relief. It was victory. His chest rose once, twice, and did not rise again. Silence happened like a door slamming between seconds. The gecko's call died mid-syllable. Even the sea noise turned its face away. Maria stood over him with her hand still inside his mouth and looked at me. Her scarf had fallen. Her hair was dull black in the lamplight. The scar shone like a road. "I told you," she said. She pulled her hand free. There was nothing in it. "He makes children." I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and my hand with my shirt, and it didn't matter. The taste stayed. It shifted as I swallowed, from coin to broth, from broth to something my whole body leaned toward without permission. Hunger flexed inside me, a dog waking. Maria wrapped her scarf again, fingers sure. "You will be fine for a while," she said in a dull, practical tone I recognized from wards and waiting rooms. "A week, a month. You will eat, you will work, you will think of other things. It will come at night when you are tired. It will come when someone says anak to you in a voice that reminds your hands what thumbs are for." "Is there a cure?" I asked stupidly. "Cures are for sickness." She looked down at the old man, and something like contempt and something like mercy crossed her face together. "This is inheritance. He chose me. Now he chose you. You can choose too." "Choose what?" She glanced toward the kitchen. The pot had stopped clinking. The water had gone still in the bowl on the shrine. "What you will feed," she said simply. "I'm not," I started, and the word cracked in the middle, a brittle thing broken under weight. She lifted her head. Somewhere in the fields, very far, a child cried, or a cat made the sound that tricks you into thinking so. "There are many towns," Maria said softly, "and people move more than they used to. I go where stories are slow to arrive. It delays the banging on doors. Sometimes people are kind to a woman with a scar. They give her rice. They hire her to watch their fathers and their little ones." She did not look at me when she said little ones. Sometimes kindness is a door. Sometimes it is a knife. She walked to the window and put one leg over the sill, then the other. In that movement, she was less woman and more shadow. "Do not follow me," she said. "You will want to, because you will hunger for someone who understands it. But you will also want to save what lives in your house. Those wants will not be friends to each other." "Wait," I said. I didn't know what for. A miracle, a recipe. She did not wait. Outside, the black field took her as easily as a hand takes water. I stood with the whip in my hand, and the lamp guttering, and the old man's mouth open on my floor, flooded by a darkness that did not seem to belong to the room. I stood with my lower lip throbbing where her blood had touched it. I stood listening to the house breathe and to myself breathing, and to the small sound of the pot in the kitchen settling as it cooled. A domestic sound so ordinary that it made my knees weak. In the morning, the neighbors came when they saw the lamp still burning, because light at dawn means either prayer or trouble, and often both. They wailed when they saw him, and brought white cloth and flowers and damp talbos of sweet potato for the wake. They did not ask why the stingray tail lay on the floor like a dead question. They did not ask why my hands shook when I accepted the cup of coffee someone thrust at me, or why I could not look at the coffee without thinking of broth. I stayed through the lamai because that is what you do. We sat up with the dead. We covered mirrors. We told stories that had nothing to do with the story I had lived in the dark. Lysol mingled with candle smoke. Children slept on benches. Old women made rosaries out of their lips. Around noon, a woman from the barangay came to ask about paperwork, and the hunger rose like a tide when she touched my arm and called me dear, and I had to stand very still and count backward from 100. When it was over, I packed my bag. I left the garlic on the shelf. I left the whip where it had fallen. I walked down the dike past the field that had held the night and the rumors, and the wind came off the sea and salted my face, and every person I passed was a door with a lock I could feel with my tongue. At the bus stop, a boy sold boiled eggs with little packets of salt. I bought one and peeled it, and the steam from it went into my nose like a map to somewhere I did not want to go and would go anyway. I touched the lick of skin on my lower lip where the taste would not leave. The boy's mother told him to say thank you to Ott, and the boy said, "Thank you, Po." And the word Po struck me in the chest like a small stone. The polite weight of it, the way it asks you to be kinder than you feel. On the bus, the driver's rosary knocked the windshield as we hit potholes. Someone behind me was telling a story in a low voice, the way they are told when they are true. "No one says her name," the voice said. "But they say she walks, you see. They say she goes from town to town, and if you look at the women who watch the dying and the children, there she is sometimes, with a scarf and a line on her face like a river." I swallowed my egg, and it sat in my stomach like a small stone that might grow teeth. I swallowed the salt that came with it, and it was nothing. The road unspooled. The fields breathed. I leaned my head against the window glass until it cooled me, and I watched the reflection of my mouth as the bus carried me somewhere else. And I tried not to imagine a kitchen I would have someday, with a pot as big as a promise, and a hand mine lifting a lid while steam curled up and found the shape of my face. Behind my teeth, a new word waited. It was not my name. It was a word that meant I was about to feed someone I loved. It was a word that meant I had become the door.